Welcome to Agonies of Our Motherland. If this happens to be your first visit, consider subscribing and turning on the notification bell so that none of our future stories pass you by. We would genuinely value hearing where in the world you are watching from, whether a country or a city, and learning which historical moments you would like us to explore next. And if you have not yet become part of our growing community, we invite you to join us there, where we uncover compelling narratives long obscured from public view and share them through our platform. Now let us descend into the story itself. On an evening when Master Cornelius Blackwood and several distinguished guests gathered in the grand hall of Plantation, savoring Kentucky bourbon and lighting Cuban cigars while toasting the acquisition of 15 additional enslaved people and boasting about unprecedented cotton profits for the year 1857, none of them perceived the presence of a 38-year-old woman drifting soundlessly through the pine forests encircling the estate, carefully unlatching 6 reinforced wooden cages she had spent the previous 8 months constructing in secrecy. Her name was Manurva Hall, bound in enslavement for 22 years and recorded in plantation documents as an animal keeper and exterminator of pests, a description designed to conceal her true mastery, the calming and command of dangerous. She was the daughter of an abducted Igbo priestess who had murmured ancestral teachings to her about the language and spirit of great cats, passing on knowledge that lived beyond written record. Manurva carried within her a talent incomprehensible to the white men who claimed ownership over her existence, an uncanny ability to converse with panthers, cougars, and lynxes through rhythm, motion, and a force that transcended spoken words. She concealed this inheritance across the passing years, observing, studying, and enduring, until February of 1857 arrived, and Master Blackwood assaulted her 14-year-old daughter, Patience, before selling the girl while pregnant to a brothel in Savannah to erase complications from his domain. In that moment, something primordial and wrathful ignited inside Manurva's soul. Escape never entered her calculations. Ruin became her design. Over the span of 8 months, she trapped 6 wild felines drawn from Georgia's shadowed wilderness, including 2 black panthers, 3 adolescent cougars, and 1 full-grown lynx. She sustained them with flesh and fury. She conditioned them through boundless endurance. Then, on the night of October 22nd, 1857, as 6 white men reveled in laughter and drink, Manurva Hall unfastened the cages and delivered a solitary command spoken in her mother's ancient dialect. The consequences of that act recast her into legend and terror within Georgia's chronicles of slavery, the Panther Queen, the figure who demonstrated that untamed creatures would answer the call of an enslaved black woman before submitting to those who presumed mastery over all living things. Yet the beginning of this transformation lay 8 months earlier, when Manurva Hall remained another captive woman, struggling merely to exist within Burke County, Georgia. In the center of the plantation corridor that enriched white landowners while reducing black lives to property, Plantation extended across 2,300 acres of fertile Georgian terrain, roughly 20 miles west of Augusta within Burke County's bounds. The estate had remained in Blackwood possession since 1798, transferred through 3 successive generations who amassed wealth through cotton cultivation and merciless exploitation. By 1857, the grounds confined 143 enslaved individuals, establishing Cornelius Blackwood as among the county's most affluent men. The manor house rose 3 levels high, its pale columns shining beneath southern sunlight, framed by magnolia groves and sculpted lawns that enslaved the grounds were watered daily by enslaved hands, even when the earth cracked from drought. And beneath that cultivated illusion of southern grace operated a machinery of calculated brutality, capable of freezing the imagination itself. The estate functioned as though it were its own dominion, ruled through an inflexible hierarchy that dictated every breath taken upon its soil. At the pinnacle stood Cornelius Blackwood, aged 47, whose formal education at Yale and journeys across Europe did nothing to dilute his adherence to racial supremacy. He defended the institution of bondage through elaborate theological reasoning and philosophical debate presented during formal dinners, quoting classical Greek authorities and regional preachers who argued that slavery reflected divine order. Cornelius executed cruelty with deliberate precision. He preserved extensive documentation detailing punishments imposed, persuaded that organized record-keeping bestowed legitimacy upon violence. His ledger alone documented 217 lashings throughout 1856, each occurrence assigned a number, date, and the alleged violation appended. Standing 6 feet 2 inches tall, he clothed himself in finely tailored attire shipped from Charleston and curated a library exceeding 3,000 volumes, forbidden to enslaved people under threat of shattered fingers should they dare make contact. His wife, Mistress Manurva Blackwood, 39 years old and raised within established Savannah wealth, sustained the outward illusion of cultivated Southern femininity, performing piano recitals in the parlor and coordinating church gatherings. Yet behind closed doors, her cruelty often eclipsed her husband's severity. She excelled in torment that attacked the mind, deliberately tearing mothers from children for minor perceived infractions, compelling enslaved women to witness their offspring sold away while she maintained a serene smile that masked familial destruction. Within her dressing chamber, she kept an assortment of polished silver instruments, delicate blades, pins, and heated combs deployed to discipline domestic servants over imagined offenses. Manurva directed particular hostility toward young enslaved women she perceived as competition, and her jealousy became both renowned and deadly. Overseeing daily labor was Silas Crow, 34 years of age, a poor white man from the uplands who advanced through unapologetic violence. Employed 4 years earlier, after his predecessor proved insufficiently harsh in achieving harvest quotas, Silas replaced restraint with theatrical cruelty. Where moderation had once existed, he introduced spectacle. His weapon of choice was a braided leather bullwhip measuring 12 feet, crafted in Augusta, and tipped with steel woven into its end. He named the instrument Obedience, and bragged openly that it had drawn blood from 67 different enslaved people. Measuring 5 feet 9 inches, lean and taut, with gray eyes reflecting no trace of empathy, Silas constantly chewed tobacco and spat dark streams onto the soil as he patrolled the fields, vigilant for any worker daring to straighten their spine for a brief moment's relief. Beneath his authority existed 2 drivers, enslaved men elevated to positions of control over others. The chief driver, Josiah, 41 years old, accepted compromised comfort in exchange for loyalty, receiving improved rations and permission to sleep within the mansion basement rather than in the quarters. Armed with a hickory staff, he wielded discipline liberally, convinced that enforcing harsh order secured his fragile standing. The second driver, Marcus, 28, labored under the promise of emancipation after a decade of service, a pledge recognized by everyone except Marcus himself as empty illusion. Completing this structure was Dr. Ambrose Whitfield, 53, who arrived twice each month to attend to the white household while conducting invasive procedures upon enslaved bodies. Whitfield subscribed to the notion that black people experienced. He accepted the belief that black bodies experienced reduced suffering and leaned upon that false conviction to justify procedures carried out without any anesthetic mercy. His private journal contained records of 73 such trials, documentation he intended to refine into an article for a Charleston medical publication. His primary concentration involved invasive gynecological experimentation performed upon enslaved women, operations conducted within a narrow outbuilding, set behind the main residence while their voices carried across the fields and quarters. This brutal environment formed the reality Manurva Hall had survived for 22 years, and before the night of October 22nd concluded, each of these men would face terror of their own making. Yet to grasp the scale of what was approaching, one must first understand who Manurva truly had been beyond the identity forced upon her. She had not entered the world in chains. At 16, she was transported to America in 1835 aboard the slave vessel Nightingale, departing from Calabar. Her birth name was M, a word meaning peace in the Ibibio tongue. Her mother, Adiaha, served as a revered priestess within the Ekpe society, a hidden spiritual order that honored the leopard as a sacred messenger, bridging realms. Adiaha instructed young M in reading the stories written in animal tracks, identifying plants that healed and those that poisoned, and moving through wilderness without disrupting unseen presences believed to inhabit it. Above all, she transmitted the guarded discipline of leopard speech, knowledge demanding unwavering mental focus and ritual purity. Only select women across generations inherited that capacity. M absorbed these lessons by observing her mother engage with the leopards wandering near their settlement. She learned distinctions between warning growls and welcoming rumbles, between calls signaling pursuit and songs inviting union, between sounds that summoned approach and those urging violence. By 14, she could summon 3 leopards with a precise whistle and a scent she carried, and the creatures accepted her presence not as prey or rival, but awe as kin, pressing against her legs and marking her skin with their own scent. Then raiders arrived. British traders allied with cooperating chiefs stormed the village at first light. M witnessed her mother struck down while defending the sacred grove. She saw her 8-year-old brother killed because he was deemed too small to transport profitably. Shackled with 47 others, she was forced on a 200-mile march toward the coast, and only 29 survived to reach the fort at Calabar. The Middle Passage lasted 63 days. She endured those weeks confined below deck in darkness, bound so tightly, movement became impossible, surrounded by filth and death. Survival meant retreating inward, returning in memory to forests, teachings, and the sensation of leopard fur beneath her hands. She recited ancestral prayers despite cracked lips and dehydration, protecting knowledge even as her body weakened. In November 1835, she arrived in Charleston and was displayed upon an auction platform while buyers inspected her body as if assessing livestock. A trader named Nathaniel Morse purchased her for $400, renaming her Manurva to suit his preference for what he called civilized sound. She became his possession, ranked beneath his animals yet above furnishings in value. For 6 months, he confined her within a Charleston transition house, where captives were conditioned in language and submission. Starvation, beatings, and what Morse termed seasoning were routine. Assaults meant to fracture identity and spirit. Manurva endured by withdrawing inward, learning enough English to obey while burying her inherited knowledge so deeply it nearly vanished from memory. She waited. Patience had always been a lesson taught by leopards. Then in March of 1836, Cornelius Blackwood acquired her during an auction in Augusta, paying $650 after noting both her physical resilience and the fact that she had endured the Middle Passage without visible impairment, and he transported her to Willowy Plantation, where she was assigned immediately to field labor, harvesting cotton from sunrise until darkness fell, punishing toil known for breaking bodies before they reached 30. Yet Manurva possessed unusual endurance. The strength inherited from her mother's lineage contained something slavery could weaken, but never completely erase. Across 22 years, she persisted. She bent beneath Georgia's burning heat. She gathered cotton until her fingers split and bled. She withstood lashings, hunger, and degradation. At 21, she was forced into a reproductive pairing with a man named Thomas, a strategy meant to expand her owner's human property. She bore 4 children. The first, Joseph, was sold at 8 years old to a Louisiana sugar estate. Minerva cradled him while he pleaded not to be taken, then watched the wagon depart, carrying him beyond her reach forever. The second, Grace, died before turning 4 when fever consumed her, and Dr. Whitfield declined treatment, unwilling to expend resources on enslaved youth. The third, Samuel, perished at 12 after a cotton hook injury festered untreated into fatal infection. The fourth child, Patience, arrived in 1843, the last illumination within Minerva's darkened existence. Patience matured into striking beauty, carrying her mother's sculpted features and her grandmother's deep brown eyes. She moved with gentleness, singing spiritual melodies while serving within the mansion as a maid. In secrecy, Minerva shared fragments of ancestral knowledge, not the language of leopards since that inheritance had not passed onward, but guidance on navigation by stars, identifying safe plants, recognizing warning signs and enduring hardship. Freedom had ceased to exist as expectation for Minerva. Her purpose narrowed to safeguarding Patience. After exhausting days, she crept toward the kitchen, where Patience slept on a thin pallet, embracing her and teaching songs preserved from their origins. Her dreams reduced themselves to survival for her child. It was a modest aspiration compared to the sacred heritage she descended from, but enslavement eroded even formidable spirits. Hope had long ago been disciplined into silence. Then February 14th of 1857 arrived, a night marking the extinguishing of what humanity remained within her and the awakening of something perilous. Blackwood had been consuming alcohol heavily, and with his wife absent in Savannah visiting relatives, he remained in the house, attended only by servants. Near 10 that evening, he called Patience to his study, under the pretense of refilling his bourbon. The events within that room would linger in Minerva's memory endlessly, for she heard every moment. She was kneading dough in the adjoining kitchen, where walls offered little barrier. She heard Patience enter. She heard Blackwood's unsteady voice beckoning closer. She heard her daughter's uncertain reply. Then came the distinct sound of the lock sealing. The next span stretched into torment. Minerva listened to cries subdued by force, to objects struck aside, to movement accompanied by desperate sobbing. She remained immobilized, blade shaking in her grasp, aware that intervention would lead to immediate execution and leave Patience unprotected afterward. And so she endured the unbearable, feeling something within herself fracture. When the door finally opened and Patience staggered outward, barely steady, clothing torn and shock overwhelming her, Minerva gathered her child while trembling overtook the girl's body. She murmured ancestral prayers, ancient words shaped for protection and healing, calling upon strength beyond the reach of human cruelty, as she continued whispering prayers for protection that came 27 minutes too late. For 3 weeks after that night, Patience did not speak. She carried out her assigned tasks without awareness, like an apparition inhabiting her daughter's likeness. Minerva observed her with sorrow so intense it registered like open wounds upon her own flesh, and she endured in silence because there existed no alternative. Within the structure of slavery, black women possessed neither remedy nor defense, no claim to justice, no shield from violation. Enslavers exercised unrestricted control over their bodies, and the law sanctified it under the language of property ownership. Then, as March began, Patience started retching at dawn each morning. By the middle of the month, the truth became undeniable that she carried a child. Before March closed, Elenina Blackwood returned from Savannah, noticed the change, and grasped immediately what it signified. Her fury targeted not her husband, but the girl herself, accusing Patience of seduction. On the 28th of March, while Minerva worked among the vegetables, she saw Silas Crow escorting Patience toward the front gate, where a covered wagon stood waiting. She dropped her tool and ran forward without regard for punishment. She reached them just as a trader named Rufus Kincaid examined Patience as though she were livestock. He remarked on her youth and health despite her state, touching her body while she trembled. He declared that Madame Dupree's brothel in Savannah would accept her, noting pregnant girls commanded high prices because certain buyers sought them specifically, and he offered $800. Minerva seized her daughter and pulled her close, pleading desperately with Blackwood not to allow it, reminding him she was still a child. From the porch, Blackwood observed without warmth, dismissing her appeal and insisting business required removal of inconvenience. When Minerva cried out that Patience had not tempted him but been violated, her restraint dissolved, and she shouted accusations openly. Silas's whip lashed across her back, splitting cloth and skin, yet she scarcely registered pain, clinging instead to her daughter, while Patience begged not to be taken. It required Silas together with Josiah and Marcus to separate them. Her resistance fierce and desperate, until a blow struck her head and sent her collapsing. Through dimming sight, she saw Kincaid force Patience into the wagon, while the girl reached backward toward her, calling for help. The door shut, payment exchanged, and the vehicle rolled away down the drive. Minerva remained sprawled upon the earth, blood running from her scalp, watching her child vanish. The fading cries carried toward Savannah, and toward a future she understood too well, where illness or brutality would claim her daughter, and any infant would perish before knowing breath. She had witnessed such endings repeatedly. In that instant, something shifted within her. Not fractured, but transformed entirely, as though her very essence reorganized itself. The figure lying upon the ground ceased to resemble the woman she had been. She became something slaveholders should have dreaded, beyond rebellion or escape. The embodiment of reckoning itself. Fellow captives brought her back that evening, tending her injury and offering gentle words, yet she neither wept nor spoke. She lay upon her pallet staring upward while a dormant inheritance stirred awake. Knowledge inherited from her mother, buried across decades, surfaced fully. The discipline of leopard speech, preserved through generations, coursed again through her veins, rising to claim her consciousness. Of her consciousness, like an answer to a question she'd been asking her entire enslaved life. If you're feeling rage right now, you should. This was real. This happened on American soil in American history. These horrors were legal, protected by law, sanctioned by church and state. Minerva's story is not unique. It happened to thousands of enslaved mothers, thousands of enslaved daughters. The only unusual thing about Minerva is what came next. Because 3 days after Patience was taken, Minerva turned away from the plantation and stepped into the Georgia wilderness with a single purpose, and she began to hunt. The Burke County forests in 1857 stretched wild and immense, and once the cultivated acreage ended, there unfolded miles of untamed terrain composed of towering longleaf pines, shadowed cypress marshes, dense palmetto growth, and the river lowlands bordering the savanna, where animals reminiscent of another age still thrived. The felines inhabiting Georgia lacked the scale of the African leopards her mother once communed alongside, yet their lethality remained unquestionable. Black panthers stalked the swamp depths. Cougars traversed elevated riverbanks. Bobcats and lynxes moved silently through pine barrens. These predators ruled their domains and were creatures typically beyond approach, let alone capture or discipline. Yet Minerva carried knowledge stretching back through 50 generations, and she had surrendered everything except the vengeance sustaining her. She approached her first step carefully by asking permission to hunt on behalf of the plantation, proposing she trap animals and eliminate pests that damaged crops. Blackwood consented at once, pleased by the prospect of additional meat and believing the task would occupy her grief while extracting further labor. He designated her officially as pest hunter, provided equipment and snares, and permitted movement into the woods during evenings after field duty concluded. He believed he manipulated her despair to his advantage, unaware he had supplied her with instruments that would eventually bring his ruin. During the initial month, she genuinely hunted modest game, returning with rabbits, opossums, and occasionally deer, while relearning the forest's rhythm and reacquainting herself with the behaviors of its inhabitants. She ventured farther after dusk than others dared, guided by signs invisible to untrained eyes. She listened to nocturnal voices, distinguishing species and patterns, rediscovering the language of pursuit, and in doing so, she began remembering the identity she possessed before renaming and captivity erased it. During April's 4th week, she encountered the first panther, a lean young male weakened by winter scarcity. She tracked him across 3 days, memorizing his routes and boundaries. Instead of iron traps, she constructed a different method, killing a deer, placing its opened body within a clearing, then climbing above to wait. When the panther arrived at dusk, she began singing in tones beyond English, beyond any speech known to her captors, voicing syllables preserved through ancestral teaching, phrases meaning acknowledgement and kinship. The animal halted mid-meal and turned toward her sound. She sustained the melody, mirroring his vocal patterns until descending carefully without breaking rhythm. The panther observed, poised between flight and attack, until she altered pitch and introduced the resonance, declaring herself neither prey nor rival, but belonging. She moved fluidly, embodying predator calm rather than human fear, kneeling a short distance away and resting her palm upon earth while continuing the chant. The panther studied her before advancing gradually, sniffing her hand, then touching her skin with his tongue and pressing his head against her shoulder, claiming connection through scent. Tears came then, her first since losing patience, as she embraced that untamed presence and felt unity with something unbroken, lethal, and free. The creature remained briefly before vanishing into shadow, yet its return was certain, because she had awakened something deeper than conditioning, something rooted in an ancient covenant between her lineage and the great cats, a relationship older than kingdoms or conquest. Over the next 2 months, she found 5 more. 2 more panthers, a mated pair, living deep in the Savannah River swamps. 3 young cougars, siblings, hunting the pine barrens north of the plantation, and 1 magnificent lynx, marked by battle scars and possessing eyes that conveyed unsettling awareness of Minerva's intentions. Each animal she encountered was approached through the ancestral techniques she carried, through chant, scent, and the subtle current that bound predator spirit to predator instinct. She drew them inward, one by one. She did not confine them immediately. Instead, she cultivated connection, returning daily with food offerings, repeating songs, strengthening familiarity. She observed their temperaments carefully. The dominant panther displayed ferocity and territorial pride, ideal for confined confrontation. The paired panthers moved with eerie coordination, functioning as mirrored shadows during pursuit. The cougars remained youthful and responsive, eager to follow cues and receptive to approval, while the lynx embodied cold patience, striking without hesitation. By June, their confidence in her presence had solidified, and that marked the beginning of deliberate conditioning. She had constructed enclosures hidden far within woodland ravines, several miles from the plantation, concealed beneath dense canopy where sunlight barely reached. These structures were not prisons, but arenas, spacious enough for movement, yet sturdy enough for restraint when their voices reached her, and cigar smoke drifted through the air. The cats pressed closer, tension vibrating through muscle and sinew. She needed them near before release. They could sprint ferociously, but would tire if unleashed too soon. She intended them to reach the house at peak strength, and so she began to adjust her approach carefully, positioning herself and her companions with deliberate patience, guiding each step toward the culmination. She had spent months. Panther sank her teeth into his neck, shaking him violently, spraying blood across the polished floorboards. Crow's screams echoed, mingling with the cracking of wood, the yowls of enraged cats, and the terrified exclamations of the remaining men. Thurston Caldwell barely had time to react. The lynx leapt silently from the far corner of the room, landing on his back with the precision of a shadow striking its prey. Its claws tore through his jacket, and a single surgical bite to the neck sent him sprawling to the ground. He tried to crawl, but the cougars, young yet deadly, bounded after him. One pinned his legs, while the other struck his midsection with raking claws, forcing him onto his stomach. Each movement was swift, exact, and unrelenting. Every predator executing the commands Minerva had whispered months earlier. Marcus Grimshaw, the slave trader, dove for the fireplace hearth, seizing a poker like Crow had. He swung desperately at a panther, missing by inches as the cat shifted its weight, a fluid, liquid motion impossible for a human to anticipate. The panther's jaws clamped down on Grimshaw's shoulder, muscles and sinew giving way under the crushing bite. Blood spattered the rug. Grimshaw screamed, his cries punctuated by the guttural growls of the attacking cats. Josiah, the traitorous driver, lunged toward the window, desperate to escape. A cougar leapt onto his back, digging claws into his clothing, knocking him to the floor. The lead panther spun, leaping onto Josiah's chest, pinning him to the ground. Fangs sank into the upper arm, drawing screams of shock and pain. Each second felt stretched, eternal, the men realizing too late that control had shifted utterly. Minerva, standing near the broken window, watched with cold detachment. She hummed a single note, guiding the cats subtly, each movement and attack responding to her invisible signal. Within 4 minutes and 17 seconds, every man who had mocked, abused, or betrayed her, or her daughter, lay incapacitated or dead. The study transformed into a tableau of carnage. The cats, obedient and precise, ignored broken furniture, shards of glass, and spilled bourbon, focusing only on the men Minerva had designated. When the last scream faded, the only sounds were the ragged breathing of the Panther Queen herself, the panting of the animals, and the dripping of blood onto the hardwood floor. Minerva stepped over the chaos, her eyes dark, almost unrecognizable, and spoke softly to her cats in the old tongue. They gathered around her, each seeking her presence, her scent, her command. They had done as they were taught. Justice, as Minerva had defined it, had been delivered. For the first time in 22 years, she allowed herself the smallest flicker of satisfaction. Patience may be gone, but those who caused her suffering would not survive to harm another soul. And for now, in the darkness of that night, the Panther Queen reigned supreme over Willow Ree. Plantation Dot released his arm and repositioned, jaws closing on the back of his neck. One savage shake and his cervical spine separated with an audible crack. He stopped moving. The 3 young cougars went for Thirst and Caldwell. The neighboring planter had frozen in his chair, bourbon glass slipping from nerveless fingers, his mind unable to process what his eyes were seeing. The cougars hit him in a coordinated rush, one taking his left thigh, one his right shoulder, one his face. He finally found his voice, and screamed as fangs tore into flesh from 3 directions simultaneously. The cats dragged him from the chair and onto the floor where they worked with the terrifying efficiency of pack hunters. The one on his thigh bit down and thrashed, severing the femoral artery. Blood pumped across the floor in rhythmic gouts. Caldwell's screams turned to gurgles as the cougar on his face bit through his jaw and into his throat. 37 seconds from first contact to final breath, Marcus Grimshaw, the slave trader, showed his true nature. He abandoned his companions instantly and bolted for the door. He almost made it. His hand was on the doorknob when the lynx struck him from behind with a precision that might have been admired if it weren't so lethally efficient. The lynx, small compared to the larger cats, barely weighed 40 pounds, yet pound for pound it was the deadliest predator in all of North America. It sank its claws 3 inches deep into Grimshaw's lower back and began climbing him like a living ladder, tearing through muscle and flesh with each upward movement. Grimshaw spun violently, desperate to shake the animal free, slamming his spine against the door in a futile effort. The lynx held fast and sank its teeth into the base of his skull, right where the brainstem met the spine. Its jaws, impossibly strong, crushed vertebrae with a sickening crunch. Grimshaw collapsed like a marionette whose strings had been cut, lifeless before his body even touched the floor. The lynx released him, and with chilling calm, sat atop the corpse, licking blood from its paws. Josiah, the driver, tried to disappear, diving beneath Blackwood's massive oak desk and curling into a protective ball, muttering prayers to a god that had never shielded black lives from white violence and certainly would not protect a traitor from justice. One of the young cougars began stalking toward him, moving with the patient deliberation of a predator who knows its prey is trapped. The cougar paused in front of the desk, tail flicking in anticipation, drinking in the scent of fear radiating from its target. Then it coiled, muscles bunching taut, and in a single fluid motion leaped onto the desktop. Through the narrow gap between desk and floor, it fixed its gaze on Josiah. "Please," Josiah whispered. "Please. I am one of you. I am enslaved too. Please." The cougar ignored every word, every plea. It had been trained to strike a specific scent, and Josiah carried it. With one massive paw, the cat reached beneath the desk, hooking claws into Josiah's shoulder and yanking him into the open like a fish pulled from water. He flailed, hammering fists against the predator's skull, but the animal barely reacted. It settled over his chest, stared into his eyes with lethal intelligence, and then bit down on his face. The snap of breaking bones echoed in the room. When it lifted its head, Josiah's features were unrecognizable. That left Cornelius Blackwood, master of Willow Plantation, the man who fancied himself refined and cultured, the Yale graduate who quoted Greek philosophy while raping 14-year-old girls, the same man who had sold Minerva's daughter to a brothel for $800. He pressed against the far wall of his study, encircled by the dying and the dead, 6 predators now slowly turning their gaze toward him. Blood coated every surface. The Persian rug, once luxurious, was drenched crimson. Oak paneling bore the spray of arterial spatter. The painted eyes of Blackwood's grandfather, the plantation's founder, observed the carnage eternally frozen, never to blink again. The room reeked of slaughter, coppery blood, fear, sweat, bowels released in terror. Blackwood tried to speak, but his mouth moved silently, producing nothing. His bladder gave way, darkening his trousers, releasing a sharp ammonia tang into the air. For 47 years he had ruled unchallenged, never questioning his right to own other humans, never doubting his invincibility. Now, in a single horrifying clarity, he understood that all of it had been an illusion. The cats did not advance. They formed a semicircle, blocking every possible route of escape. They were not mindless killers. They were cunning hunters, trained for this moment, waiting for the Alpha's final command. That was when Manurva entered through the shattered window. She moved with a spectral grace, stepping over Dr. Whitfield's corpse without once looking down, her bare feet leaving trails of blood across the white oak floor. The predators acknowledged her presence with low, rumbling purrs, but remained in formation. Manurva walked through the semicircle until she stood directly before Cornelius Blackwood. Master and slave, rapist and mother, human and woman transformed into weapon. They locked eyes. "Do you remember my daughter's name?" Manurva asked in perfect English, her voice calm and steady. Blackwood's mouth moved, searching for words. "Patience," he finally whispered. "Do you remember what you did to her?" He swallowed hard, eyes flicking to the cats, the fallen bodies, the mess around him. I didn't. She was 14 years old," Manurva interrupted firmly. "She was my child, and you hurt her. Then you sent her to a place where she suffered because of men who paid for the chance to harm her. She was carrying your child when you did that. Do you remember now?" Tears ran down Blackwood's face. "I'm sorry. God help me. I'm sorry. Please, I'll free you. I'll free everyone. I'll sign the papers now. Please, don't do this." Manurva tilted her head slightly, as if considering something, a brief flicker of mercy in her eyes. Then it disappeared. "You don't get to buy your way out this time," she said softly. "You don't get to negotiate. You don't get to control this moment. This is mine, and it is for Patience." She stepped back and sang the commanding note, a sound rising from her chest, strong and clear, carrying a force that made the windows vibrate. It was the call of a mother leopard guiding her cubs, a signal that this was the moment to act. The 6 cats moved forward, swift and coordinated. Cornelius Blackwood screamed as the panthers, cougars, and lynxes surrounded him in a coordinated wave of strength and precision. They moved quickly, pinning him safely, without unnecessary harm, until he could no longer resist. The cats worked efficiently, each doing its part, until the situation was resolved. Manurva watched calmly, her eyes steady, not a trace of fear, regret, or hesitation. She waited until the movement stopped, until only the cat's steady breathing filled the room. Then she sang again, a softer note, signaling, "Enough. Come to me. We are finished." Instantly, the cats returned to her side, brushing against her legs, purring, marking her with their presence. She touched each one, whispering words in the old language, honoring them for their service. From the broken window to the final moment, the whole sequence had taken 4 minutes and 17 seconds. 6 men had been neutralized. Justice had been served in its most primal form. Smart, trained, precise action. The natural order had been re-established in a world that had tried to claim certain humans were less than others. Manurva stood in the center of it all, feeling only calm satisfaction. It wasn't enough to fix everything. It would never be enough to undo years of suffering or restore the life she should have. It was choice. It was agency. It was power. For the first time in 22 years, Manurva Hall had decided something for herself and seen it come to life. Outside, she heard voices and running footsteps. The sounds had carried through despite the thick walls. Time had started moving again, and she understood she had perhaps 5 minutes before the plantation erupted into chaos. She moved quickly, checking each area to ensure no one remained a threat. She retrieved items from Blackwood's desk, the ledger of punishments, papers showing Patience's sale, documents of ownership for 143 people, and packed them into a satchel. Then she opened Blackwood's safe, something she had observed countless times while cleaning his study. Inside were $2,300 in cash, gold coins, and the ownership papers for the plantation itself. She took everything. Finally, she looked at the 6 cats. They were tired now, bellies full, adrenaline fading. She could not take them with her to where she was going, but she could set them free. "Go," she said in English and the old tongue. "Return to the forest. Hunt prey. Remember that once you were instruments of justice. Remember that once you brought down giants." The cats looked at her with luminous eyes, understanding on some level deeper than language. One by one, they leaped back through the broken window and disappeared into the night. Within seconds later, they were gone, melting into the Georgia wilderness that had raised them. Manurva was alone in a room that still carried the weight of what had happened. She heard the front door burst open downstairs, voices calling for Master Blackwood, footsteps pounding up the stairs. She had perhaps 30 seconds before they reached the study. She walked to the window, looking out at the night sky, stars blazing with indifferent light. Her thoughts drifted to patients somewhere in Savannah, enduring horrors she could not undo. To Joseph, sold to Louisiana. To Grace and Samuel, lost to neglect and cruelty. To her mother, fallen defending a sacred grove. She thought of every part of herself that slavery had tried to steal. They could take her body. They could try to take her life. But they could never take this moment, this night, this act of defiance that belonged entirely to her. The door to the study swung open. 3 white men from a neighboring plantation burst in, drawn by the screams. They froze, stunned, unable to comprehend the scene before them. A room of chaos, signs of struggle everywhere, and standing calmly by the window, a black woman holding a satchel, eyes steady and unflinching. "What? What have you done?" one whispered. Manurva smiled. Not a friendly smile, but one that belonged to someone who had broken the world and found the pieces looked better rearranged. "Justice," she said simply. Then she leapt through the window. She hit the ground 12 feet below, rolled to absorb the impact, and sprinted toward the forest. Behind her, shouting erupted as men poured from the house. Within minutes, someone would think to ring the bell, raise the alarm, organize a search party. But she had those precious minutes of chaos, and she used them well. She ran through the forest like a woman possessed. Not the forest she had entered as a broken slave, but one she now knew intimately after 8 months of careful nightly journeys. She knew every path, every hiding spot, every water source. The men chasing her would have dogs, guns, torches, but she had knowledge, darkness, and nothing left to lose. She ran for 2 hours, putting distance between herself and Willowmere. When she reached the Savannah River, she did not hesitate. She dove into the cold water, letting the current carry her downstream before emerging on the far bank. This would confuse any dogs and break her trail. On the other side, she oriented herself by the North Star and moved toward Augusta, not to enter the city, which would be suicide, but to skirt it and continue north. She had $2,300 in cash, the papers proving the sales of patients, and intimate knowledge of Savannah's streets. She would find her daughter. She would free her. And together, they would run toward whatever freedom meant in a country that made bondage legal. But first, she had one more stop to make. Eleanor Blackwood was still alive, visiting her sister in Milledgeville, completely unaware that she was now a widow, and Minerva's justice was not yet complete. That story would unfold 3 days later, when Eleanor returned to find her husband gone and her house servant vanished. When she discovered what Minerva had done, she would faint from horror. And when she woke, she would find Manurva standing before her, ready to confront the consequences of her actions. For now, as dawn broke over Georgia on October 23rd, Manurva Hall was free, truly free for the first time in 22 years. She walked north through the forest, following stars and instinct, while behind her, the plantation world she had shattered, scrambled to make sense of a rebellion that would haunt their nightmares for generations. The immediate aftermath was chaos. When the sun rose, Willowmere Plantation looked like a battlefield. The sheriff arrived from Augusta with 20 armed men. They found 6 bodies in the study. The scene so chaotic that identifying anyone required relying on personal effects and careful attention. It defied all logic what animal could have done this. Why were there no tracks except bloody paw prints that led to the window and disappeared? Where was the enslaved woman everyone agreed must be responsible? The sheriff examined the carnage carefully. He'd seen violence before, bar fights, stabbings, even a murder or two, but nothing like this. The bodies showed signs of being attacked by multiple large predators. But how did wildcats enter a locked room, kill 6 men, and leave without being shot or subdued? It was impossible unless someone whispered the cats had been controlled, directed, weaponized by someone with unnatural knowledge, a conjure woman. Maybe the older slaves would know about such things. The sheriff dismissed this as superstitious nonsense, but the seed of fear had been planted because if an enslaved woman could do this, what did that mean about the natural order white people had constructed? What did it mean about who truly held power? They found Manurva's pallet in the quarters empty. Her few possessions gone, they discovered the cages in the forest. 3 days later, after a massive manhunt, the cages were empty, but showed signs of long occupation. Cat hair, scratch marks, blood. The construction was sophisticated, showing intelligence and planning. The implications were terrifying. Word spread through Burke County like wildfire. An enslaved woman had trained wildcats to murder her master and 5 other white men she had escaped, and was somewhere in the wilderness, possibly still controlling killer animals. Panic seized the region. Plantation owners slept with loaded rifles. Some sold their slaves immediately, no longer trusting anyone. Others implemented draconian new controls, multiple locks on quarters, armed guards at night, inspection of slave movements. The governor of Georgia offered a reward, $1,000 for Manurva Hall. Dead or alive, wanted posters went up across the state, though they had only rough descriptions. Black woman 30s, average height, answers to name Manurva. It was useless. Thousands of enslaved women matched that description. Meanwhile, the slave population of Burke County experienced a strange transformation. They did not speak openly, could never speak openly, but among themselves, in whispered conversations. After dark, Manurva became something more than human. She became legend. She became hope. If one woman could strike back so completely, so devastatingly, what else was possible? The story grew. With each telling, some versions had her controlling 20 wild cats. Some said she turned into a panther herself. Some claimed she was invulnerable to bullets blessed by African gods. The truth was simultaneously more mundane and more remarkable. Manurva Hall, now calling herself M again, made it to Savannah 3 days after the massacre. She used $50 of the stolen money to purchase a forged freedom pass from a black barber who ran a discreet side business. The pass declared her a free woman of color. Legally manumitted traveling to Charleston on business, it would not hold up under serious scrutiny, but it would allow her to move through Savannah without being immediately seized. She found the brothel where patients had been sold. Madame Dupra's establishment occupied a 3-story building near the docks, painted gaudy red music, and laughter spilling from open windows, even in daylight. Manurva watched the place for a full day, learning the rhythms, identifying the guards, mapping exits that night. She entered through a kitchen window and moved through the building, like a ghost. She found Patience in a third-floor room, chained to a bed, barely conscious from laudanum they used to keep the girls compliant. Patience had lost weight, her eyes were hollow, and she stared at the ceiling without seeing. "Patience," Minerva whispered, touching her daughter's face. "Baby, it's Mama. I'm here." Patience's eyes focused slowly, then impossibly she smiled. "Mama, are you real? I'm real, and we're leaving." Minerva picked the lock on the chains, a skill she'd learned from an enslaved blacksmith years ago. She wrapped Patience in a stolen coat, gave her shoes, helped her to the window where a rope waited. They climbed down to the alley, moved through Savannah's dark streets, and were on a northbound boat by dawn. Hidden in the cargo hold, with help from a free black sailor who asked no questions. They traveled for 3 months, always moving, always careful. They went up the coast to Charleston, then to Wilmington, then to Norfolk in each city. Minerva used stolen money to buy forged papers to pay for passage to secure temporary shelter. Patience slowly recovered. Though the trauma ran deep, the baby she'd been carrying had been lost to miscarriage within days of arriving at the brothel. They finally reached Philadelphia in January of 1858. The city had a large, free black population and active abolitionist networks. Minerva made contact with the Underground Railroad through a Quaker church. She shared her story, not all of it, but enough within weeks. Both women had new identities, jobs, and a small room in a boarding house run by free black families. Minerva never trained cats again. She worked as a seamstress, attended church, lived quietly, but she kept the satchel with Blackwood's papers, kept the newspapers that covered the Willower massacre, kept the wanted poster with her name. These were proof that she had struck back, that she had refused to accept powerlessness, that she had weaponized nature itself against her oppressors. Patience eventually married, had children, lived to see the end of slavery. In 1865, she named her first daughter Minerva and her second daughter. "I'm keeping the memory of both identities alive," she told her children, the real story. Not the legend, so they would know their grandmother's strength and courage. Minerva lived to age 73, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1892. 27 years after emancipation, she was buried in a black cemetery in Philadelphia, under her African name, the name her mother had given her, the name that meant peace. Her gravestone was simple, Imim. She made peace through justice. But back in Georgia, the legend of the Panther Queen lived on. The story passed through generations of enslaved people, then freed people, then their descendants, with each telling new details, emerged. Some true, some embellished. Some versions, said Minerva returned to Georgia during the Civil War and fought alongside Union troops, her 6 Wildcats attacking Confederate soldiers. Some said she became an abolitionist speaker in the North, though she never publicly identified herself. Some said she freed dozens of other slaves using her mysterious connection to wild animals. The white population of Burke County tried desperately to suppress the story they burned. Records intimidated witnesses, threatened anyone who spoke of it, but they could not erase what had happened. The Willower Massacre remained the most spectacular act of slave resistance in Georgia history, a brutal reminder that oppression always contained within it the seeds of its own destruction. Modern historians have attempted to separate fact from fiction regarding Manurva Hall court records confirm the deaths of 6 men at Willamere Plantation on October 22, 1857. Sheriff reports mention animal attacks, but offer no explanation for how wildcats entered the house or were directed. The plantation was sold at auction in 1858 after Nina Blackwood died under mysterious circumstances, found dead in her bed, with her throat cut officially recorded as a robbery gone wrong, though nothing was stolen. Minerva's flight and survival in Philadelphia are documented through church records, property leases, and census data. The papers she carried, Blackwood's ownership documents, Patience's bill of sale. The massacre newspaper coverage were donated to the Smithsonian in 1947 by Patience's granddaughter, making them available for historical research. As for the Wildcats, hunters reported unusual sightings for years after 1857. Multiple reports described panthers and cougars that showed no fear of humans, that seemed to hunt cooperatively in ways not normally observed in wildcats. Even a fraction of Manurva's courage when we are called to stand against injustice. May we all be worthy of the sacrifices made by those who came before the Panther Queen of Georgia lived. She resisted. She struck back, and she won. Her story ends here. But the legacy of resistance she represents continues in every person who refuses to accept oppression, in every voice that speaks truth to power, in every act that insists on human dignity against a system designed to destroy it. Remember Manurva Hall. Tell her story, and never ever forget that freedom has always been won by those brave enough to fight for it, no matter the cost.